Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 2nd of March 2019 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today has been presented on your screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Next article appears on page number 13. The title of the article is Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index at a 40-month high of 54 in February. This particular article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian economy. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper because the India specific Purchasing Managers Index has been released for the month of February. And according to the latest report, the PMI for the month of February stands at 54.3. It is to be noted that a PMI reading of over 50 means that there is an expansion in the manufacturing activity. However, a reading of below 50 means there is a slowdown in the manufacturing activity. So if you look at the PMI for the month of February, it stands at 54, which clearly shows that the manufacturing activity in India has picked up. And this is considered to be significant because the manufacturing activity, according to PMI, stands at the 14-month high. And this increase in the PMI has been attributed to the increase in sales, output, as well as the employment in the Indian economy. Now, with respect to your upcoming prelims, you would be required to know certain basic details related to the PMI, such as who measures the PMI, how the PMI is measured, and its importance. Apart from that, most of you must be aware that the manufacturing activity in India is tracked by using an indicator known as the Index of Industrial Production. So one should also know the difference between the IIP as well as the Purchasing Managers Index. Let us start discussing these aspects of the article one by one. Let us first understand certain basic details related to the Purchasing Managers Index and then look into the differences between the PMI and the IIP. It is to be noted that the Purchasing Managers Index is compiled and constructed by an organization known as the Market Economics in India, whereas in US, the PMI is compiled and constructed by another organization known as the Institute of Supply Management. However, for both India as well as USA, the PMI is published by a Japanese firm known as Nikkei. The most important aspect which one must know with respect to PMI is that the PMI does not track the volume of production in a country. Rather, the Purchasing Managers Index tracks the sentiment of the investors. In other words, it measures the perceptions of the investors of the manufacturing activity in terms of a quantitative value. And in order to measure this particular sentiment, the market economics carries out a survey of 500 private sector companies. And in this particular survey, the managers of these private sector companies are required to give their perception related to the manufacturing activity. And this particular perception can be seen in terms of 5 indicators such as the new orders, inventory levels, production, supplier deliveries, as well as the employment. So, in this survey, the managers of these private sector companies would be required to respond to these queries related to 5 indicators, wherein the respondents, that is the private sector managers, can report better, same, or worse conditions as compared to the previous month. Now, one important aspect which you should note with respect to your prelims is that the Purchasing Managers Index does not include the public sector undertakings, and it takes into account the sentiments of the managers of only the private sector companies. And as we have discussed, a PMI reading of over 50 would mean that there is an expansion in the manufacturing activity, and a PMI reading of below 50 would mean that there is a contraction in the manufacturing activity. Now, with respect to your prelims, you are not required to understand as to how the PMI is actually calculated. However, if you know these two concepts, that would be sufficient. Coming now to the importance of Purchasing Managers Index. Now, if one look at the important indicators in India, such as the Index of Industrial Production, they are normally released in the second week of a month, However, if one looks at the Purchasing Managers Index, they are usually released at the start of every month. Hence, the importance of the Purchasing Managers Index lies in the fact that it is released much before the official statistics such as the IIP. Apart from that, the Purchasing Managers Index takes into account different indicators such as the new orders, inventory levels, production, etc. Because of this, it is considered to be a leading indicator of the economic activity. For example, the inventory levels, that is the amount of goods in the warehouses, can provide an important indication related to the economy. For example, in the longer run, if the inventory levels increase to a very higher level, this essentially means that there is a less demand for the goods in the economy. And this lower demand for the goods can point out to the fact that the economy may be facing recession in future. Similarly, if the inventory levels is lower, this essentially means that the company is selling more amount of goods in the economy due to the higher demand. And this would show that the economy would face a higher economic growth in the future. So, because of this, the PMI can be considered to be a leading indicator of economic activity in a country. So, having understood different aspects of PMI, let us now understand the differences between the PMI and the IIP. Now, as we have discussed, the Purchasing Managers Index does not track the volume of production, rather, it tracks the sentiment of the investors by carrying out a survey of the managers in the private sector companies. On the other hand, the Index of Industrial Production tracks the changes in the volume of production of the industrial goods. The second difference is the PMI is calculated by the Japanese firm Nikkei, whereas the IIP is published by the Central Statistical Organization, which works under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. The third difference is the PMI covers only the private sector companies and it excludes the PSUs. On the other hand, the IIP covers both private sector as well as the public sector companies. The other important difference is that there are two separate purchasing manager indexes. There are two separate purchasing manager indices. One is for the manufacturing, whereas the other PMI is for the services. And the purchasing manager index for the service is also calculated by the same process. So the purchasing managers index takes into account both manufacturing as well as services. On the other hand, the IIP takes into account only the manufacturing activity. And lastly, since a PMI is calculated by a private sector agency, it is not used for the GDP calculation in India. On the other hand, the IIP is used for the GDP calculation, wherein the IIP is used to account for the manufacturing activity of the unorganized sector. So these are some of the important differences between the PMI and the IIP. Thus, having analyzed all the aspects related to Purchasing Managers Index as well as the differences between the PMI and the IIP, let us now move to the next article. The next article appears on page number 14. The title of the article is Eversource National Infrastructure Investment Fund CDC Group to invest 330 million in the INA renewable. This particular article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection Indian economy. The development of infrastructure such as roads, railways, ports, airports, etc. is considered to be extremely critical for the growth of Indian economy, wherein according to some of the studies, over the period of next 5 years, India needs to spend approximately around $1,000 billion in order to build the infrastructure. Hence, in order to give a boost to infrastructure financing in India, in the Union Budget 2015, the Government of India has set up the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. And this particular fund is also referred to as a quasi-sovereign wealth fund created by the Indian government. And as the name suggests, this particular fund would be mainly used for financing the infrastructure projects in India. So with respect to your upcoming prelims, you would be required to know mainly three things with respect to NIIF. Firstly, what exactly is Sovereign Wealth Fund and how is it funded? Secondly, what exactly is National Investment and Infrastructure Fund and how it works? And lastly, the difference between the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund and National Investment Fund. Let us start discussing these aspects of the article one by one. Let us first understand about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, some of the countries which are considered to be essentially the exporting countries have built a huge amount of forex reserves. Now, in order to make an optimum use of these forex reserves, some of the countries have created a sovereign wealth fund, and this has been created by taking out some percentage of money from the forex reserves. For example, you must be aware that China is considered to be a global manufacturing hub, and more importantly, China has a trade surplus with most of the countries. Because of this, China has built a huge amount of forex reserves. And accordingly, China has created the Chinese Investment Corporation as a sovereign wealth fund. So, what essentially happens under a sovereign wealth fund is that the money lying with a sovereign wealth fund is in turn invested in the global market. For example, the money lying under the sovereign wealth fund can be invested in the global stock exchanges such as the New York Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, etc. So, the countries typically invest in financial assets across the world in order to make optimum profits from their forex reserves. So, a sovereign wealth fund is essentially a state owned investment fund that invests in the financial assets across the world. And what is important to be noted here is that a sovereign wealth fund is 100% owned by the country, and they are majorly funded through the forex reserves. For example, one of the biggest sovereign wealth fund of the world is that of Norway, wherein the Norwegian government has set up the Government Pension Fund Global as a sovereign wealth fund with a total value of around $1 trillion. Similarly, some of the oil exporting countries in West Asia, such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, etc., have also set up a sovereign wealth fund. So, the three important aspects which one must know with respect to sovereign wealth fund is that they are 100% owned by the country. The money under the sovereign wealth fund is mainly invested in the global market. And thirdly, it is mainly funded through the usage of the forex reserves. Now, coming to National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Now, as we have discussed, the NIIF came into being after the Union Budget 2015, and it is referred to as the Quasi Sovereign Wealth Fund. This is because, unlike the sovereign wealth fund of countries such as Norway and China, wherein these countries own 100% of their sovereign wealth fund, the NIIF is only 49% owned by the Government of India, and the remaining 51% of NIIF is owned by domestic as well as the foreign investors. So, one major difference between the sovereign wealth fund of other countries and NIIF of India is that while the sovereign wealth fund of other countries is 100% owned by them, in case of India, the government owns only 49%, and that is a reason it is referred to as the quasi sovereign wealth fund. So, what the government is essentially doing is the government is providing 49% of the funds to NIIF, and remaining 51% of the funds is garnered from domestic as well as the foreign investors. For example, some of the domestic investors in NIIF include banks such as the HDFC Bank, Axis Bank, ICICI Bank, etc. Similarly, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority became the first institutional investor in NIIF in the year 2017. Now, the money with the NIIF is given in the form of equity support to various infrastructure companies such as the Indian Rail Finance Corporation, the National Housing Bank, Power Finance Corporation, as well as the private sector entities which are involved in the construction of infrastructure projects. For example, as the article has highlighted, the NIIF is said to invest in a company known as the INA Renewable, and this particular company is involved in the generation of the solar power in India. So, the equity support which is given through the NIIF is in turn used by these companies to build the infrastructure projects in India. In a sense, the NIIF can also be considered as the banker of bank because of the nature of operations undertaken by the NIIF. Now, coming to the difference between NIIF and National Investment Fund. Now, you all must be aware that the Government of India is undertaking the disinvestment of the public sector undertakings, wherein under the disinvestment, the government is selling the shares of the PSUs. So whatever money the government gets to the sale of shares goes into a separate fund known as the National Investment Fund. And as the name suggests, the proceeds of the National Investment Fund would in turn be used for the investment by the government. In this regard, the government of India has come out with detailed guidelines with respect to the purposes for which the NIF would be utilized for. So the basic difference between the NIIF and the NIF is that while NIIF is a quasi-sovereign wealth fund with 49% stakes of the government of India and remaining 51% stakes from both domestic and foreign investors. On the other hand, the NIF is funded through the proceeds of disinvestment. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now move to the next article. The next article appears on page number 6. The title of the article is Fires are a crucial component of some forest systems, says a group of scientists. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Environment under the subsection Environmental Conservation. As you all must be aware, recently there were large scale forest fires in Bandipur National Park located in Karnataka. Now, this has undoubtedly led to a large scale destruction of forest as well as a loss of wildlife. Interestingly, this particular article here has highlighted that the forest fires are not necessarily bad as they are thought to be. This is because the article argues that the forest fires lead to the development of forest ecology, wherein immediately after the fires, the forest would be able to support a new form of vegetation. Apart from that, the article also highlights that we can fight fire with fire, which means to say, scientific and human controlled fires can actually prevent and reduce the large scale destructive forest fires. Hence, as part of this video analysis, firstly we'll understand as to how the forest fires lead to development of forest ecology and how we can fight fire with fire. And an expected UPSC mains question from this particular article could be there is need for more scientific and thoughtful management of forest fires rather than advocating a blanket ban on forest fires. Discuss. Let us now start analyzing these aspects of the article. Let us first understand as to how the forest fires lead to the development of the forest ecology. Now, normally in the forest, dormant seeds of plants and trees are buried in the ground. However, such dormant seeds do not grow due to the mature plants. That is to say, the mature plants are able to outcompete the dormant seeds in terms of access to water as well as nutrients. Hence, because of the mature plants, the dormant seeds do not grow. However, due to the forest fires, the mature plants are destructed. Apart from that, these dormant seeds also get exposed to heat and light. On account of these two reasons, the dormant seeds in the forest start growing. Hence, it is said that the forest fires revive the dormant seeds of the plant species and may lead to the development of rare plant species. For example, this has happened in Australia, wherein after 2009 large scale forest fires, certain rare plant species had got developed in the forest. And such rare plant and tree species were able to attract more number of birds, leading to an improvement in the forest ecology. Thus, even though it is portrayed that the forest fires lead to large scale destruction of forest, in reality, the forest fires lead to development of rare plant and tree species. Similarly, it has been observed that some of the tree species which survive the forest fires tend to show a higher growth rate immediately after the forest fires. For example, a group of scientists has observed that the woody trees were able to survive the forest fires in Madumalai, and immediately after the forest fires, the woody trees were able to have a higher growth rate. Similarly, the article also argues that the forest fires leads to destruction of the invasive tree species, wherein the article has given the example of the Soliga community in Karnataka. It is to be noted that the Soliga community earlier used to live in a tiger reserve known as the Bili Ranganatha Swami temple in Karnataka. However, When this was declared as a tiger reserve, the Soliga community was removed from this tiger reserve in order to prevent the human-animal conflict. So when the Soliga community was living inside the Billy Ranganatha Swamy Tiger Reserve, the Soliga community used to lit small litter fires. And these human controlled fires were mainly lit in order to destroy a invasive tree species known as lantana. Now what has been observed is subsequent to the removal of Soliga community from the Billy Ranganatha Swamy Temple Tiger Reserve, there has been spurt in the growth of this invasive tree species. Let us now understand as to how we can fight fire with fire. Now, normally you must have observed that on the forest floor there is huge amount of dry litter as well as biomass. And the main problem with the dry litter and the biomass is that they act as a fuel in case of forest fires, wherein both dry litter as well as biomass have a tendency to increase the intensity of the forest fires, wherein the low intensity forest fires can change into a high intensity and large scale forest fires. So, in order to prevent a large scale high intensity forest fires, we need to destroy the dry litter and biomass by adopting a scientific and low intensity controlled fires. Thus, it can be argued that the forest fires have to be considered as an important tool for the forest management, wherein scientific and low intensity controlled fires can lead to improvement of forest ecology as well as prevent and reduce large scale forest fires in future. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Further, based upon our discussion, you can try writing answer to this expected UPSC mains question. With this, let us now move to the next article. Now, this particular article appears on page number 9. The title of the article is Changing the Stripes of Conservation. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Environment under the subsection Environmental Conservation. Further, an expected UPSC mains question from this particular article could be: the tiger conservation efforts in India needs a serious rethink in terms of strategy in order to reduce the man-animal conflict. Discuss. In the year 1973, the government of India launched Project Tiger in order to arrest the decline in the tiger population in India. And this particular project has proved to be successful, which is evident in the fact that the tiger population in India has consistently been increasing. Now, this particular article here has highlighted that there has been an increase in the tiger population in the Tadoba Andheri National Park located in Maharashtra. And because of this increase in the tiger population, the Yavatmal district of Maharashtra, which borders the Tadoba Andheri National Park, has been witnessing an increase in the man-animal conflict. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we shall predominantly focus on two aspects. Firstly, we'll understand the reasons for man-animal conflict, and secondly, we'll understand as to what steps we have to take in order to reduce the man-animal conflict. Let us first understand the reasons for the man-animal conflict. Now, as we have discussed, due to the success of Project Tiger, the population of tiger has increased in India. However, if one looks at the conservation areas, that is, the core or buffer areas of the tiger reserves, they have remained the same. Because of this, the tiger reserves are not able to support more number of tigers. Apart from that, due to the degradation of the habitat, there has been decline in the prey base of the tigers. So this clearly shows that the food chain has got disrupted. So because of the disruption of the food chain, the tigers have been migrating towards the human habitations in search of food, and such kind of migrations have led to the man-animal conflict. The second problem is with respect to the disruption of the migration corridors. Now what essentially happens is, if the tiger population in a tiger reserve increases, the tigers tend to migrate to other tiger reserves where the population is less, and such a migration takes place through the corridors. So what essentially we must be doing as part of the tiger conservation efforts is that we need to identify these migration corridors. After identifying them, we need to map these corridors and ensure that such migration corridors are free from human interference. For example, the Tadoba Andheri Tiger Reserve and the Nagzira Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra can be linked through a wildlife corridor. Now we need to ensure that this particular corridor is mapped, identified and free from the human interference. However, this particular article has highlighted that in most of the cases, there is no clear mapping of the migration routes. And even if the mapping of migration routes has taken place, the migration routes have got fragmented due to the construction of roads and the railway lines. So, because of construction of roads and railway lines through the migration corridors, there has been increase in the incidents of roadkill of the wild animals. The third reason identified by the article is construction of large scale projects in and around the tiger reserves, wherein the article has given the example of the four laning of National Highway which is passing through the Pench and Kanha Tiger Reserve, which are located in the state of Madhya Pradesh, as shown in this particular diagram. So, what should be done in order to reduce the man animal conflict? Now, as we have discussed, even the population of the tiger has increased, the area under conservation has remained same. So, we have to ensure that whenever there is increase in the population of the tiger, the area under conservation should also increase commensurately. Further, the tiger conservation efforts should also focus on the migration routes, wherein we should identify and map the tiger routes and ensure that such migration routes are free from the human intervention. So, these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Now, based upon our video analysis, you can try writing answer to this expected UPSC mains question. With this, let us now move to the next article. Now, the next article appears on page number 6. 3 states to curb the red Sanders racket. This article shall be important mainly from the perspective of prelims under the subsection General Issues on Environmental Ecology. Now, during the recent interstate meeting, the Forest Department officials of the states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu have come out with a blueprint in order to curb the illegal trade of red Sanders. Hence, with respect to prelims, let us understand certain basic details related to the red Sanders. Red Sanders is considered to be a non-aromatic variety of sandalwood. The red Sanders is endemic to southern India and it is normally found in the forest which is categorized as the southern tropical dry deciduous forest. Red Sanders is mainly found in Palkonda and Sechachalam hill ranges in the state of Andhra Pradesh. The location of these two hill ranges has been shown on the map for your reference. Apart from the state of Andhra Pradesh, red Sanders is also found in the neighboring states of Tamil Nadu as well as Karnataka. Further, you need to note that there is a huge demand for red Sanders in the international market, wherein red Sanders is used for making musical instruments, furniture, woodcraft, etc. Apart from that, it is believed that red Sanders has medicinal value, because of which red Sanders is also used as an immunity medicine in China. So, because of the huge demand for the red Sanders in the international market, illegal felling of the red Sanders has been taking place in the states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka as well as Tamil Nadu. And if you look at the IUCN status of red Sanders, it has been placed under the near threatened category. Further, as per the CITES convention, it has been placed under the Appendix 2. As you all must be aware, under the Appendix 2 of the CITES convention, the international trade is tightly regulated or controlled. However, if a plant or an animal species is listed under Appendix 1 of the CITES convention, then the international trade is completely prohibited. So, since the red Sanders has been placed under the Appendix 2 of the CITES convention, the international trade of the red Sanders is tightly controlled. Now, recently, the red Sanders was also in news because earlier the government of India had put a complete ban on the export of red Sanders. Now, earlier what used to happen was that only those red sander logs which were seized from the smugglers were exported by the government, and the farmers in India who used to cultivate the red Sanders were not allowed to export and they were allowed to sell the red Sanders only in the domestic market. However, the main problem was that the domestic prices of the red Sanders is almost half of the global prices. So what the government of India has done now is that it has allowed the red Sanders to be exported. However, the red Sanders can be exported only if they are obtained from a cultivated land. So this particular measure of the government is expected to boost the incomes of the red sander farmers. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. With this, let us now move to the next article. The next article appears in the form of a lead article on page number 8. The title of the article is Ensure a Minimum Income for All. Now, this particular article is essentially arguing that the Indian government should implement a universal basic income for the poor and vulnerable sections of the Indian society. Now, in our DNS dated 30th of Jan 2019, I have comprehensively covered all the aspects related to the universal basic income. Wherein in this particular video, we have discussed concepts such as the quasi-universal basic income, the problems with UBI and quasi-universal basic income, and the possible alternatives to the universal basic income. So I suggest you to go through this particular DNS dated 30th of Jan 2019 in order to understand this particular lead article. Now based upon our video discussion, these 4 questions shall be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answers to these 4 questions. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The first question here is, consider the following statements related to the Purchasing Managers Index. The first statement here is, it is compiled and published by Market Economics. As we have discussed, the Purchasing Managers Index is published by the Japanese firm known as Nikkei. Hence, this particular statement here is wrong. The second statement reads as, it takes into account the manufacturing activity in both private companies and PSUs. Even this statement here is wrong. This is because the Purchasing Managers Index takes into account the manufacturing activity of only the private sector companies and PSUs are excluded. The third statement reads as, the Purchasing Manager Index reading of over 50 denotes expansion in the manufacturing activity, while a reading of below 50 denotes contraction. As we have discussed, this statement here is correct. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is D, that is 3 only. Now coming to the second question, the question here is, with reference to the National Investment Infrastructure Fund, consider the following statements. The first statement is, it is a sovereign wealth fund of India with 100% ownership of the central government. Now this particular statement here is wrong. This is because, as we have discussed, the National Investment Infrastructure Fund is a quasi-sovereign wealth fund wherein the government of India has a ownership of 49%. The second statement reads as, it provides equity financing support to the infrastructure financing companies. Now this statement here, as we have discussed, is correct. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 2 only. Now coming to the third question, the question here is, consider the following statements related to red sanders. The first statement here is, it is mainly found in the southern states of Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. Now as we have discussed, this statement here is correct. The second statement reads as, it is listed under Appendix 1 of CITES and hence there is complete prohibition on the international trade in red sanders. Now as we have discussed, the red sanders has been placed under Appendix 2 of the CITES and the international trade of red sanders is tightly controlled. Hence this particular statement here is wrong. So looking at the options, the correct answer to this question is A, that is 1 only. Now coming to the fourth question for the practice, the question here is, arrange the following hill ranges of India from north to south. The first one is Rajmahal Hills. Now this particular Rajmahal Hills is located in the state of Jharkhand. The next option is Garajat Hills. This particular hill ranges is located in Odisha and it also extends into the state of Chhattisgarh. Palli Hills is located in the state of Tamil Nadu and Palkonda Hills, as we have discussed, is located in the state of Andhra Pradesh. So if you have to arrange these hill ranges from north to south, the order would be, first one shall be the Rajmahal Hills, the second one shall be the Garajat Hills, The third one shall be the Palkonda Hills, and last shall be the Palani Hills. Hence, if you look at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B. That is 1, 2, 4 and 3. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.